This is the best advice I could give you. It's shut up. Do not say anything, but this is more of a criminal defense advice. And it's very simple, and it's shut the fuck up.
My name is Mark Real Jr., the Fathers Rights Attorney, and you are watching another episode of the Fathers Rights Playbook. And on today's episode, we have a very special guest. We're going to venture a little bit outside, but related to the family law world. I have immigration attorney Nar Cruz. Nar, how are we doing today?
We're doing great. Hey, before this podcast, you told me you're going to vote for Kamala. Is that right?
No comment. There are social media videos out already on that topic. Nar, thank you so much. We came all the way to Austin, despite both of us being in Southern California to film this, but immigration is one of those topics that relates very, very tightly with family law and with my practice, especially around domestic violence. So I think the first question, kind of to get it out there, is how does domestic violence or being accused of domestic violence impact your immigration status?
So there's a difference between being accused of domestic violence and being convicted of domestic violence. So which one is it? Were you accused of domestic violence or were you convicted of domestic violence? If you were accused of domestic violence, you're okay. Don't worry about it. But if you were convicted, now we're talking about immigration consequences. Now, before we go further, not every conviction is the same. Some of them don't have immigration consequences, and it's very state specific. So not every domestic violence conviction is made the same. So, Mark, this is a very specific conversation. We have to talk about the nuances of the conviction. So we really have to go deep into the conversation of what type of conviction this was. If you're looking at this podcast and you're watching us talk about this issue, we really have to look at your case, and we really have to analyze it.
Yeah, so let's say, the vast majority of our viewers and listeners are in the state of California. Both of us are licensed attorneys, and for a little bit of perspective to our viewers, immigration is a federal process, and Nar and I are both attorneys in the state of California, but immigration is the federal process, so he's going to touch cases in all kinds of states coming from all sorts of different countries. So let's narrow down to in California. So in California, we have two very unique. When someone says, hey, I have a domestic violence issue, there's two paths that could be going down. The most common one is in family court, where something like 40% of divorces have a domestic violence restraining order filed at some point in time. And you have the more serious on the criminal side. So I'll ask a very direct question, and we can dive into the nuance of that. So if you are accused of domestic violence and maybe you're going through immigration proceedings, you're working on your green card or potentially citizenship, and the police show up at your house and want to talk with you about a domestic incident, from an immigration perspective, what is going to be your kind of general rule of thumb advice?
So this is an immigration attorney advice, but this is more of a criminal defense advice. And it's very simple, and it's shut the fuck up. It's pretty much shut up. And this is the best advice I could give you. It's shut up. Do not say anything. This is the best advice I could give you. You are not going to talk your way out of this. You are not going to outsmart the police. You are not going to talk your way out of this. And this is why. You are your worst enemy. You are not going to be able to convince the police that you did nothing. And let me go ahead and explain it this way. Imagine the police is there to speak to you about the incident that happened. They are not there to decide who is right, who is wrong. They are there to investigate a crime and make an arrest. That's it. They are not there to decide whether or not you are guilty or not guilty. So don't try to talk to them and plead your case to them. So just go ahead and remain silent. That is the best advice anyone could give you.
It's funny you say that because my number one piece of advice to all men and fathers going through family court is, when in doubt, shut the fuck up. So if our listeners and viewers, it's a lot of the same. It's going to be a lot of the same advice. So they're going to show up. They're going to investigate. Like Nar said, their job is to investigate a crime. A lot of instances, they're going to be deciding on who to arrest. Unfortunately, if you're a man, the percentages are not good for you in terms of them picking the other party to arrest. So let's fast forward then. So an arrest occurs. There's probably, if you're going through a divorce or you're going through a custody proceeding, there's probably a corresponding restraining order filed in family court. When there is a finding of domestic violence, let's say you do get convicted of domestic violence in California state courts, what is the next step?
So it really depends when you say there is a finding of domestic violence. Was this in the criminal context, or was this in a state court, like, for instance, maybe a domestic violence restraining order hearing?
Let's talk about both of them. So let's start with the criminal, because that's going to be the more serious one. So you are convicted of some crime of domestic violence. There's a couple of them in the state of California. From an immigration perspective, what should their next step be?
So you really have to look at what your immigration status is. If you are a green card holder, how will this affect you going forward? Could you be put in removal proceedings, deportation proceedings, or could this affect you from getting your U.S. citizenship? Obviously, you have to have 5 years of good moral character. Now, if you get convicted of a domestic violence type of crime, then you need to have 5 years of good moral character. If that means that you will not be placed in removal proceedings and you're good, you're in the clear, then you just have to wait 5 years until you're able to apply for U.S. citizenship. Now, if you are a green card holder and you were convicted of a domestic violence type of crime, or you're a non-citizen, you don't have a green card, then I hope your criminal defense attorney knew about your non-citizen status, and whatever conviction you obtain, that criminal defense attorney was able to negotiate a non-immigration type of consequence conviction, so it won't affect you in the immigration realm. That is extremely important. So here in the state of California, especially in criminal court, the court is very careful with not having immigrants, non-citizens, having the type of convictions that could affect their immigration status, collateral consequences. So they will definitely go after you for committing a crime in the state of California, but they will be very careful to not have collateral consequences. That means that they don't want to affect you in other areas like immigration. That's not part of the case. That's not part of the punishment. That is called a collateral consequence. That is something that happens afterwards. That's not part of the consequences of of a criminal act. So most likely, if you work with a California attorney, I would assume that your attorney was competent enough to not get you convicted for one of those crimes that could have immigration consequences. So normally, you would probably work with one of those attorneys that was diligent enough to prevent those type of consequences.
Okay, yeah. So we want to avoid kind of additional punishment for your crimes. Let's flip over to the family law side. And obviously family law is not a criminal conviction. The vast majority of domestic violence restraining orders don't get referred out to the district attorney's office to prosecute. If you are a father and you're a non-citizen, which is irrelevant in California courts. It's irrelevant to your punishments. I will say that. Whether it be family court, criminal court, it is irrelevant, your immigration status, to those proceedings. if you're in family court and you are not a citizen and you are accused, the mother of your children files a domestic violence restraining order against you, and the family court makes a finding that domestic violence has occurred, what are the next steps, and are there any consequences from an immigration standpoint that come with a finding of domestic violence in family court?
So we're talking about a family law court proceeding, which is different from criminal. Normally, immigration doesn't go into the civil side of proceedings. What does that mean? It means that, with immigration proceedings, you do get fingerprinted. There's something called biometrics. You get fingerprinted. They do background checks, but they're not so extensive where you go ahead and they go into civil proceedings like what happened in family law court, where they pull transcripts out and they look at family court proceedings. Obviously, if someone provides that information, it could be something very negative. It could go into moral character. It could go into your propensity to not be someone who could obtain discretionary type of relief if that is something that you're looking for. Sometimes immigration does provide benefits to non-citizens who are looking for the type of benefit, immigration relief that varies or hinders on discretion. Discretion is the biggest thing that some immigrants hinder on when it comes to relief. Relief, like for instance, a certain status like humanitarian benefits like your U visa, your T visa, sometimes BAWA, which is a benefit certain immigrants could get when they've been exposed to cruelty by a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse. Sometimes that hinders on discretionary relief. So, if there's a finding of domestic violence by a civil court, like a family law court, that could be a negative for discretionary purposes.
So you brought up a really interesting piece, and I think we can kind of, this will be the last topic we talk on this. And a very common issue we see is a lot of immigrant men, regardless of status, will not report domestic violence, will not make an accusation of domestic violence. And some of the most nasty instances of domestic violence are against this community. And so what would your advice be? We see so many of these men struggling. They may be physically abused, or their partner or spouse is attempting to use their immigration status against them to coerce them into doing things, whether it be giving them all their money, obeying their every command. What advice would you have for the men out there that are maybe going through that, and what protections can they acquire?
So sometimes when you don't report a crime, that's that's very unfortunate. You just shot yourself in the leg for a benefit called the U visa. U visa requires you to be the victim of a qualifying crime. You do have to cooperate with law enforcement. That means that you do have to be qualified as a victim, meaning that you have to speak to police and you have to cooperate with the prosecutor and the court system. But let's say you didn't do that and you were married or you are married going through divorce proceedings with a U.S. citizen, legal permanent resident, and now you're in this dilemma. If you could argue three things, you could potentially end up with a green card. Number one, that you were married in good faith. In other words, that you entered into this marriage and that you were married for the purposes of marriage, and that you did your part as a husband, you provided, you did all that. Number two, that you suffered cruelty as a result of your relationship with this U.S. citizen. That could be mental, that could be psychological, that could be emotional, that could be verbal, that could be economic cruelty. And number three, that you have good moral character, meaning that you're not a person with criminal convictions, et cetera, et cetera. you could end up with a green card based on this type of mistreatment. These cases could be won with your declaration, with your affidavit, and also with cooperating evidence. So you could win a green card based on this argument through VAWA.
Yeah, and that's the misconception. There's issues with VAWA, and I've obviously spoken extensively on this, but it's Violence Against Women's Act. It doesn't just mean females. There are benefits in immigration. And my advice is a lot of times we have the individuals that are not citizens are scared to be involved in legal proceedings, are scared to go to the police, are scared about what's going to happen. Number one is California is pretty robust when it comes to protections. In family court, it's actually statutorily part of the family code that immigration status is irrelevant to a custody situation. It's irrelevant to a dissolution. Most judges will actually get legitimately angry if the other side tries to bring it up. But I feel for the guys. They don't want to come forward. And the number of times where a man's been a victim of serious domestic violence for 3, 5, 7, 10, 20 years, and just culturally they won't come forward. And the minute something happens, the wife, the girlfriend, the mother of their child runs forward with it, and then they get put in a really, really bad spot.
Listen, if you're hearing this, you've been through a lot. This is something that the law provides. Don't be ashamed of this. Don't be embarrassed about this. The fact that you married in good faith, the fact that you put forth an effort to make this work, you put your neck on the line, you financially provided for your family, you went ahead and did your part, you went through a lot. You deserve this. You went ahead and you sacrificed a lot. You brought your family. You went ahead and did a lot to deserve this. Don't be afraid to ask for VAWA. There is no shame in doing this. You deserve these benefits. You are not a victim. Don't look at it this way. You have to look at it a different way. There is no shame in filing for VAWA. You do this for yourself. You do this for your family. You do this for the future of your, of your immigration status. You have to secure your immigration status. You cannot look at it from the perspective of, I shouldn't do this because, I'm a coward, because, it's called VAWA, Violence Against Women's Act. Get rid of that mentality. You have to look at it from the perspective of, I have to secure my life in this country. When you do that, you have to go forth, and you have to make sure that you have a future in America.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nar. For all the viewers and listeners, where can they find you?
Just go ahead and give me a call at 877-619-8472.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nar. Thank you for your time. To all our viewers and listeners, we will be back again next week with another episode of the Fathers Rights Playbook.